Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Meadows, and I serve as the Director for the Division of Energy Assistance within the Office of Community Services and the Administration for Children and Families. On behalf of the division, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on completing the fiscal year 2023 Household Report long form version. Before we begin today's discussion, I did want to take a moment and highlight yesterday's announcement of the release of federal fiscal year 2024 LIHEAP funds. I want to take a moment and thank our partner agencies and all of the staff at OCS who helped make this release of funding possible. I recognize firsthand how important having these resources available to begin your heating program is, and I'm so grateful to this wonderful team for all that they are doing to make this release happen. Now, switch over topics. I wanted to cover today's webinar. We're going to have two presenters talk through the LIHEAP long form, two presenters with a great deal of LIHEAP experience in supporting our grant recipients. Melissa Torgerson of Verve Associates, again, has extensive experience in the LIHEAP program and works regularly to assist states with in-depth technical assistance. And Dan Bouch of Apprise has more than 10 years of experience conducting LIHEAP report training and review. Next slide, please. Today's webinar, we will focus on key items that are needed to complete the fiscal year 2023 household report form, which again is due to be submitted in OLDC on December 15th. And I would note that that form is not yet available in OLDC. We are working with our partners at Grant Solutions to have that form available to you within the next month. The purpose of today's webinar is to review key requirements for completing the long form version of the report, to explain changes made to the report for fiscal year 2023, to review data you need to successfully complete the report, and to provide a refresher on how to enter and submit the report in the OLDC system. If you have staff unable to attend or you want to hear the training again, today's webinar is going to be repeated on December 5th. It will be the same webinar with the same content. Again, I really appreciate you all joining us today. I hope today's training event is valuable. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone on the team if you have any questions throughout this process. With that, I will turn it over to Melissa to take it from here.
Thanks, Megan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first report training of the season. Today's webinar is on the long form household report, and our webinar today will be about 60 minutes long. You'll notice that the slides, as well as a number of handouts, are available in the sidebar of your GoToWebinar screen. And this webinar is being recorded and will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. We want to make a quick note that this is the long form household report, which is required for states to complete. Tribes are required to complete the short form. Now, this means that there are several areas of this webinar that may not be relevant to tribes, but there still are parts of this webinar that are important to pay attention to when you are completing your short form. Next slide, please. If you have questions as we're going along, you're encouraged to ask them as you have them by typing them into the GoToWebinar question box. And there's a little diagram here to help you find where that is. Submitted questions will be reviewed during the webinar and responded to at the end. And if there's not time, or if it's a question that it requires a really detailed response, we'll go ahead and send you an email. So I'm not going to go over this whole slide, but keep in mind that we put a lot of information on these slides. And the reason is that we know some of you will listen to this webinar, but then go back and review the slides for more kind of in-depth training and maybe even pass these slides off to members of your staff who will be helping you to complete the report. So this slide 5 is kind of like a table of contents, and it goes over different key areas so that you can quickly find topics that you're looking for when you go back and review these slides later. And we want to start with a poll. So hopefully you all are paying attention. Today's poll asks you, how prepared do you think your team is for completing the FY 2023 LIHEAP Household Report? Are you not at all prepared? You haven't turned your attention to it. You're a little prepared. You're aware of it, but you haven't really planned to do anything with it yet. You're mostly prepared. You are planning and you're working out challenges or nuances, or you're very prepared. You're already working on it and you understand what's going on. If you could all take a few moments. Joseph, you can close it when you see people stop responding, and go ahead and give us the responses. All right, so it looks like most of you fall in those middle categories. You're either a little prepared or mostly prepared. And what we're hoping is that this webinar will get you a little bit further in terms of progress, both in terms of understanding and maybe getting started on working on this report. So I'm going to turn this over now to Dan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this first webinar. As Melissa said, we're happy you're here. I wanted to start with just giving you the high-level picture of the different federal reports. This is for state grant recipients. These are all the different reports that are coming up in the next few months or were recently submitted. You, of course, submitted your model plan for this current fiscal year. And the reports coming up are looking back at what happened either at the end of last year, like the quarterly report for Q4 that's due next week, or the entirety of the last fiscal year, as we're going to cover today for the household report, which is looking back at all of federal fiscal year 2023. This is a great one to just keep and print out and have handy for anyone who's working on the different reports, so you're aware of what the due dates are and what each report is focused on. Okay, so today we're focusing in on the household report, and the household report is one of the more historic, long-standing federal LIHEAP reports. It's been submitted since the 80s. And as Melissa said, states and some territories submit the long-form version, which asks for lots of different household count information. And tribal grant recipients complete a shorter version of the report called the short form that is focused on counts by assistance type. So there's three main types of data the household report focuses on. First, it's asking for counts of households that got each individual type of LIHEAP assistance you may have, or each different LIHEAP component. So how many got heating assistance during a federal fiscal year? How many got cooling assistance? How many got LIHEAP weatherization? Second, it asks for states to report on the total households who were served across all of those different components. So any household that was touched by federal LIHEAP dollars during a year, and that's also called the any type of LIHEAP assistance line. And then third, it asks for different demographic information on who is served by LIHEAP. So for the past several years, it's asked for information on vulnerable members being in the household and on income levels through what's called poverty intervals. So how many households are below 75% of poverty, for example. We're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the new items that were added to the report, beginning with this year's report for 2023. It's important for you to know this data is used when you report it. So it's used to tell the public about LIHEAP and how many different households are impacted by LIHEAP. It's used to respond to questions from lawmakers. It's published in the data warehouse that you can access online on the LIHEAP Performance Management website. It's put in the annual report to Congress. And here on the right, you can see that based on the household report information, state grant recipients assisted more than 6 million households with LIHEAP in FY 2022. So that's important information to be able to report about the program. All right, so we're going to cut to the chase and get to what's new for 2023 reporting. So first is on June 9th, the action transmittal for the report was published. That action transmittal talks about what the reporting requirements are, the due date, and it also included the detailed instruction document that explains each line of the report. Those are, we're going to have links to those, and the detailed instructions are included in the handouts in GoToWebinar, so probably on the right side of your screen. So the due date for the household report is December 15th. So it's the middle of December. That was posted in that action transmittal. And so we want everyone to be aware of that due date as the end of the year approaches and we all get busy with different requirements, that the due date's December 15th. So we're gonna have some steps in the webinar for how you can plan for that due date. OCS, as Megan said, is working to make this report available in OLDC. So OLDC is the same platform that you use to submit your model plan. It's also going to be used for this household report, and we will have some information on how you can get instructions if you need help using OLDC or finding the report. One important note with OLDC is when you go to submit your report, it has to be certified by the designated authorized individual to be able to fully submit it. So if you have questions about who that is, or you need help figuring that out, you can reach out. You should reach out to your program specialist at HHS, and they'll be able to help you with that process. Okay, so there are two main changes to the 2023 report, household report. The first is a good change for you all to know, because it means information you reported in the past no longer needs to be reported. So for many years, the household report asked for information towards the end of the report on the number of applicants for each type of assistance. That information was collected in two different sections, and OCS has made the decision to remove that information from the report because, number one, all grant recipients have different definitions of what it means to be an applicant and how to count applicants because of the different ways to apply and the different approaches for administering LIHEAP. And that information as a result was not being used. So it has been removed from the report, and you no longer need to provide counts of applicants. The second change is that new demographic items on the assisted households have been added to the report. And we're gonna go over these in detail. So there are new questions, new lines in the form about whether a household is owning or renting. There's also questions about the race, ethnicity, and gender that are reported by the primary applicant. Some of the items are required for the report that's due in December, and there's some additional items that are optional and will not be mandatory until next year's report for 2024. With these new items, they are very important, and OCS has added them in order to help assess the success of different efforts to conduct outreach, and as they look at LIHEAP and how it's distributing resources equitably. So they're important elements. Many states were already collecting these to some extent, and OCS published a Federal Register notice in 2022 with information about this, looking for comments, and the changes were approved and they've been added to the report. So these are the two primary changes. There have been no other new lines added. There are no changes with different funding sources and asking for a breakdown for a new funding source, nothing like that. So these are the primary two changes that have occurred. So there are some resources that exist to help you to prepare. So a lot of these are included as those handouts in this webinar. Besides the instructions and the action transmittal that were published in June, we have a resource called the Check Before You Submit document, and that was updated recently to add new questions for the new demographic items. So we encourage you to look at that. It's a good document to help you determine if you have what you need to submit the report. And then we have another new resource. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And this is just a short example that has 3 sections showing you how you can move from your raw data to calculating items that need to be reported and where those would be reported in the report. So it's a kind of a simple tool, but it may be helpful for your programmers or your contractors or your IT staff just to verify how they're calculating some of the household accounts. So that's included as a handout. All right, now we're going to move on to the key points for reporting.
All right, so these are kind of some of the key things you should be thinking about as you begin preparing and then putting together your report. And keep in mind, this doesn't cover all of the bases, but it covers some major things that we see in the report each year. And you're always welcome to call us if you want us to go into more detail on anything you see in these slides or anything you're not seeing in these slides. So the first key point is that you need data for each household assisted. And so the following data points are needed: the types of assistance each household received during FY 2023, the type of funds used to provide each type of assistance. So you need to be looking at regular, ARPA, CARES, those are examples. The household poverty interval or level, as well as a vulnerable status indicator. So this can be a yes/no indicator for whether the household includes an adult age 60 or over, a member with a disability, or a young child under 6. Now, as Dan mentioned, there's some changes this year, and so for 2023, you're also going to need to know the housing tenure of the household, whether they own or rent their home, the race of the primary applicant, the ethnicity of the primary applicant, and the gender of the primary applicant. And Dan's going to give you very specific fields to look at a little bit later in the webinar. Now, there are some options, optional data elements in this report. So for example, some states opt to report whether or not households include a young child under the age of 3 or young children ages 3 to 5. And so if you want to be able to report on that, you obviously need to be collecting that in your application. The other thing that will be required next year, but that is optional for this year, is to report on the race, ethnicity, and gender of all household members, not just the primary applicant. So this is this is one of the tough challenges I think people face, is sometimes getting their head around this idea of counting assisted households and unduplicated counts. We talk about that a lot. And so in this kind of section of the webinar, you're going to see us run at this a few different ways because we know people learn differently. But this is definitely an area that you'll want to take back and maybe look at more closely at your desk or with your programmer to make sure you have a good understanding of what you should be reporting. And so when we look at the household report, we're looking at reporting how many households received assistance or have a particular demographic characteristic. So if your household issues supplemental benefits or can give the same household multiple heating benefits, we're not counting the number of times you issue a benefit to the household. We're counting the number of households that get those benefits. So for example, if you provided 10,000 different households with heating assistance in the early winter, and then later gave those same 10,000 households a supplemental heating benefit, that means you issued or paid 20,000 heating benefits. But that's not what we're counting. We're going to count the number of households, which stays at 10,000. They're the same 10,000 households that got both a heating and a supplemental benefit. And so in the household report, on the heating assistance line, you would be reporting 10,000 households. Let's look at this another way. One of the things that the household report asks you to do is kind of give some totals, unduplicated counts of who got bill payment assistance. And this is the number of households that received at least one benefit used to pay the household's energy bills. And that might be heating, cooling, or crisis. And we're looking just at the number of households that got any one or more of those services. And then any type of assistance means we're counting the number of households that got any type of LIHEAP, whether it be those energy assistance or bill payment assistance payments, or whether they got weatherization, maybe they had furnace repair or replacement. We're talking about everything with the exception of nominal SNAP assistance, and that is what some of you call the heat and eat program. Those are not to be included in the any type of assistance line. So one of the ways that I learned about unduplicated counts was looking at numbers and colors. And so one of the things I want you to look at here in the heating line is the Jones family. You'll notice they're kind of a periwinkle color if you're looking at your screen. And within the heating assistance line, you can see that the Jones household here got 2 benefits, but we're not counting the number of dots here. We're counting the number of colors. That's one way to think about unduplicated counts. So although there are 4 instances where we gave people benefits, there are only 3 colored dots in the heating line, and therefore we're only counting 3 households. And you can see the same when we get down to any type of assistance. You can see the Jones family and the Rodriguez family got multiple benefits across different types of assistance. But when we get down to an unduplicated count, we're not counting the number of instances where we gave a benefit out of any type. We're counting the number of colors who received any type, and that comes down to 4. And then same with bill payment assistance. You'll notice that the Lee household only received weatherization, and since that's not bill payment assistance, they were removed from that particular line. So this is a tough one to go over in a webinar, but it's something that may be helpful as you sit back down and give this some more thought. So when we think about this unduplicated count, we're thinking of the same thing in different sections, including section 3, where we look at vulnerable households. Household with multiple members with the same vulnerability type should only be counted once under each column. And when you get to this elderly, disabled or young child column, where we're saying how many households have at least one vulnerable member in any category, we're not summing across the row. We understand that households can have more than one type of vulnerability, and we only want them counted once. And so we've put together an example here on the next screen that I think is really helpful. Household A has an older member age 60 and a member with a disability. So you can see we've put them in one row, and we've ticked off yes under 60 plus and disability. Household B has a member with a disability and a young child under age 6. So once again, you can see we've ticked yes under disability and 6. And in both of these cases, we've also included them to the any type of vulnerable household line. Household C has an older member age 60. So we've just got one yes there. And then once again, they're counted in the any type of vulnerability column. And household D has no vulnerable members, so you're going to see no straight across the row. Now the household report is going to ask you for some totals, right? So when we look at how many total households had a member age 60 plus, you can see that that's 2. You see 2 yeses. When we get to member with disability, it's also going to be 2. You can see them highlighted there. Young child under age 6 should be 1. And then when we get to any type of vulnerability, remember we're counting the households, not the occurrences. So we're totaling down the column and we have 3 yeses. And so this is another way to begin thinking about unduplicated counts. We're counting the number of households, not the number of occurrences. Next slide, please. And now we're going to talk about steps to take to begin to prepare to submit the report by December.
Okay, so December 15th is going to sneak up on everyone. So we thought it was important as part of the webinar just to go over some of the steps that you want to be thinking about as you get ready to complete the report. So the first is there are a series of steps to take to be able to get the data you need to then run queries, run calculations, fill in the report, check the report, and get everything submitted by that December 15th due date. So this is just an example. schedule we made on this slide. This is not required or something you have to do, but this is just an example of a part of the process and part of the steps you might be thinking about. It's important as that, especially as November, December approach, that you work with your IT staff or contractors to know when the report will be ready to be checked, and to set aside time to enter it and submit it in OLDC. So we encourage you to look at this and think about a similar schedule for your own state, territory, or tribe. Okay, step 2 to prepare the report is, if you have components of your program, of your LIHEAP assistance that are not in your main system, or that you run with program partners like weatherization agency, or part of your data is being tracked by the local agencies, you do want to have a plan in place to get the data you need from them to be able to fully complete the household report. Easy example is weatherization. So some states, everyone receives heating assistance, and a portion of those households receive other kinds of assistance. But for other states, it may be the case that not everyone receives heating assistance. If that is the case, it's a little bit harder to, there's a few more steps. It's a little bit harder to get any type of LIHEAP assistance count, because you need to count up households across all the different components and make sure that you're not double counting. So to do that with weatherization, you need to get information from them on who received LIHEAP weatherization and their characteristics, like their poverty level, vulnerable member status, etc. You can't just get a summary report that we assisted 50 households or 20 households. You need to know who those households were, so you can identify if they received other kinds of LIHEAP assistance and account for that in your any type of assistance count. So this is something just to remember with your weatherization department or other program partners, that you need household level data to be able to complete the report if people do not always receive heating assistance. All right, number 3 is confirming access to OLDC. So we know that staff change, credentials expire. So it's just important in advance of the due date to see if your login information works for Grant Solutions, if you're able to find the report, and if you're having trouble, if it's not working right, if you're locked out, we would encourage you to either contact the OLDC help desk or to reach out to your program specialist. On the bottom of this slide is information on how you navigate to find the report. So first you pick the program, you pick LIHEAP, then you pick the right abbreviation or code for your grant recipient name. Then you go to household report, and there's different reporting periods that get shown, and you want to pick the period for FY 2023, which is October 2022 to September 2023. So this is a helpful slide if you're having trouble finding it. All right, number 4, if you are a state grant recipient, each year our staff at Apprise look at the household reports, and we send you questions about any items that we are having trouble understanding or need clarification on. And sometimes those lead to revisions in your report where you may edit and make a correction, or you might add a note. And to make sure that you have accounted for those in the new report, we encourage you to look back at our emails from the beginning of this year when we reviewed the 2022 reports. Those can help you to just avoid any repeating any issues for 2023. And especially if you're new to the household report, they might help you get an understanding of how some of the more complicated items would be addressed. All right, so we're going to turn to looking at the new demographic items that are in the household report. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the two changes to the report are the applicant count information has been removed, and now new demographic items on assisted households have been added to the latter sections of the report. So these are included in sections 5 to section 9 of the report. They were added to help HHS get a better understanding, as well as the public, of the composition of households that are assisted by LIHEAP. And there was a comment period, and HHS has been trying to include notifications about these changes in different communication channels. These are demographic items, and there are, of course, different viewpoints on what should be collected and how to collect it and what categories to use. For the household report, what OCS decided to do was to use the categories and questions that were approved and used for the LIHEAP program, which is the low-income home water assistance program. So the same categories that many of you were collecting information to report for LIHEAP are the categories that are being used here for LIHEAP. All grant recipients are asked to use the same categories. You may be collecting, you may have been collecting information for a long time using your own categories or your state categories. And HHS understands that your categories may not be these. But for reporting in this report, they're asking everyone to use the same categories. And as we go through it, you'll see that if you have an item that it's not really clear how to categorize it, that's something that you can reach out for assistance on. But there's also categories that allow for that, those nuances. All right, so we're going to look first at tenure, which is own renter status. So this is now in section 5, and the spreadsheet version of the form, what the form looks like, is included as a handout as well as part of this webinar. This is asking you to report on the number of, for all the households that are assisted, report how many of the households are cases where the primary applicant or the household owns the housing unit that they live in, or they rent, and there's different rent categories: rent with utilities paid separately from rent, or rent with utilities included in the rental fee. There is an other category as well for unique situations, like someone who occupies a housing unit but doesn't pay rent, for example, but doesn't own the building, doesn't own the home or pay rent. And then these are new, and we know that some of you may not have this information for all your households, or maybe working on getting it ready. And so there is a 5th category. You'll see unknown, not reported, where you can report for households where that information was not included by them on the application or is not available. For the most part, the status for tenure is going to come from your applications. It's usually included as a question on the application. And many of you may use this to help determine the benefit amount a household will receive. So that's another way that you can identify if someone's owning or has utilities included in rent, so forth, based on the benefit amount. As with the other parts of the household report, you're going to want to focus on, if you go back one, Joseph, you're going to want to focus on reporting each household only once. So there are situations where, as Melissa said, the Jones household maybe got heating assistance in October. They needed heating assistance again in February, and they applied again. And maybe something changed where they moved from renting the house to owning the house. And so you might see the same household has different information. because we just want you to report at the household level here, you have to decide on an approach to just report each household once and keep only one status. So we usually recommend using the earliest record if there's a change in status in the year. And if you're running into that and you need more information, definitely reach out to us and we can talk about it. Second new section that's been added to the report is related to section 6, and that's going to ask for information on race and ethnicity for the primary applicant. The first part of that is section A, and as you can see on the screen here, that's ethnicity, and there are 3 categories for this demographic item. Again, the third category is an unknown not reported if the information is not available. And this is usually an item that that you collect on the application as well, and allow applicants to voluntarily report if they would like to. So it's understood that this information isn't available for everyone. You may have differences in the categories you're using, but these are the categories that have been selected for the report. And again, this is just focused on the primary applicant, or you may call them the head of household. And you're asked to just report the counts for each category. All right, same section in section 6, part B is new information you're asked to report on self-reported race of the primary applicant. There are a number of categories here. And again, these are categories that came out of what was approved and used for the Federal Water Assistance Program. This is a little bit more complicated because of the number of categories. And I just want to, again, emphasize we have the not reported unknown category. But if you look at the table at number 7, there's also an other category. If you have a more detailed information you're collecting from households, more categories, and you don't see an easy way to bucket something, or you don't think it's appropriate to do that, there's this other category. There's also a multi-race category, number 6, for applicants who select multiple options. As with ethnicity and also tenure, this information is usually something that's collected on the application when people apply for assistance. So if this is new to you and you haven't seen this or weren't aware that this was being collected, I think the place you would start is, if you're not sure if you're collecting it, looking at your application. And the final new one that's being required for the 2023 report is on the gender of the primary applicant. This one has 4 categories. I should have pointed out earlier that for all of these, the very bottom line that says total is something that OLDC is going to auto calculate, so it'll add them up for you. For this one, again, we have an unknown not reported category. The information usually comes from the application, and we understand that it may take some conversation or some time to be able to fully report all of these new items, but we wanted to just highlight for you that there's different categories, and if you have questions or we're not involved with reporting for LIHEAP, we definitely encourage you to reach out for us so we can talk about it and see how we can help you. So there are optional items, so you can report these this year, but or you cannot, and they will become mandatory next year for next year's 2024 report. These items are all of the same demographic information, race, ethnicity, gender, but they're asking for that information for all household members. So for many of you, you have a household member roster that lists each household member and some key information about them. That's where this would be coming from. To be able to report this next year, I have a note here that you want to be starting to collect this information if you haven't before for your 2024 household members. Okay, so before we go to final reminders, I just want to again say that we understand these are all new items for folks, and you may have questions about how to report different information. And we again encourage you to reach out and to do your best as you begin reporting these new elements. All right, we're going to turn to reminders and then questions.
Okay, so just some reminders of some things that we've talked about. The report is due in OLDC on December 15th, 2023. Grant recipients should be planning to complete the report by this date, which means taking a look at that slide that Dan put together on an example timeline and planning backwards to make sure you're giving yourself enough time. The final household report must contain final data from your tracking systems and program records. And if you need assistance in completing the report, please contact Apprise as soon as possible. Don't wait until the report is due. Take a look now. If there are things that you already see you may have questions about, please reach out proactively. Next slide. As Dan mentioned, there are two main changes to the household report. We're no longer collecting the count of applicants for each type of assistance, so that section is gone. But there is now a new section that collects demographic information on assisted households. And as Dan mentioned, for this year, the households you served in 2023, this last year, you're only reporting on the primary applicant. For the households you're starting to serve right now and through FY 2024, you're going to need to be collecting information for all household members. So if that's not in your system, it should be a priority to get it in there so you can do that reporting come next fall. If you do need assistance with understanding or implementing, once again, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for. This is just a reminder that there's a whole element to these reports, which is putting it into OLDC. And any of you who've had experience with this knows that if you leave this to the last minute, it is certain that OLDC will not be your friend. So keep in mind that when you need to log in, you need to have a password. And so if you haven't logged in a while, this is something that you'll need to make sure you have and have updated, and that there is a separate help desk for grant solutions. You're always welcome to call Apprise your liaison, but there are some circumstances where we're going to have to refer you to the help desk. So even if your report isn't done, it's worth the time to go in, log in, make sure you can get into OLDC so that when your report is ready, you can do that easily. Next slide. As Dan said, there is a whole kind of step to submitting your form in OLDC, and that includes having individuals with a permission to certify and submit based on whatever agreement you have in your state. And for some of you, this can be someone who is busy or maybe high up in your agency. And so depending on who has authority, you're going to want to make sure that they know when they need to sign and that they're available to do so. The steps once you get it in is to enter and save your report. When you're ready, you can validate it. Once your form is valid and correct, you'll certify and submit. And once again, that certification process must be done by someone with permission. When you enter your information into OLDC, there are built-in validations to help people. I always call them gutter bumpers. If you've gone bowling with gutter bumpers before, they kind of give you reminders of where something, you may have mistyped something or where some information may be entered in error. So warning messages are data that might be correct but require confirmation and additional explanation in the notes section. You can get past warning messages without changing the data. But if you get a fatal error message, this is something that must be fixed before you can go on. It's something that's either arithmetically impossible, it just doesn't fit, it's very inconsistent. And so Grant Solutions will not let you go forward with submitting your report until these fatal errors are addressed. Now, if either a warning or error message appears and you're unable to resolve it, you should contact Apprise for assistance. But the biggest takeaway from this slide is that if you have any warning messages pop up and you look at it and you say, yes, this is the right data, I don't care what you say, OLDC, this is right. Anytime you have a warning message, you should be putting in a note to explain why it's okay. If you don't, you can guarantee that you'll get a call from Apprise asking you, are you sure you meant to put this in? If there's a note there, Apprise can see that you've seen it, reviewed it, have confirmed that it's the right data, and they won't need to give you a call. Once you submit your report, Apprise will email you if they have any issues or questions once they do a review. So there's a set of validations in OLDC, and then Apprise runs another set of validations on your report to check for accuracy. Once you get a note from Apprise, you should promptly provide a response and make any corrections to the report. And this may include some work with Apprise to find out what exactly we're saying and what steps you should take to fix it. When the report is confirmed to be accurate and complete, your liaison will accept it in OLDC. And then if you later identify a correction or changes needed, you'll need to submit a revision in OLDC. These are a number of household report resources that might be useful to you or anyone on your staff who are helping you put together the report. Next slide. This is, as we mentioned, the first in a number of webinars intended to help you with your federal reporting. And so we will be doing a repeat of today's webinar in December. We'll do a set of webinars on the performance data form, the grantee survey portion, which is module 1, in both November and January. And the same for part 2. We have that in two separate webinars because they're two very different kinds of reports. And both of those will have a November and a January webinar. And then in February, we'll do a quarterly report webinar, especially for those new coordinators who are getting up to speed on with all of this reporting. We can't underscore this enough. The biggest issue we ran into, or one of the biggest issues we ran into last year, is people waiting too long to get started on their performance data form. Now, this isn't the household report, but in January, the performance data form, in particular Module 2, the performance measures are due. And this requires a little bit more legwork than some of the household report, for example, or even Module 1, the grantee survey, because for many of you, it requires getting information from vendors. And so in order to have this done on time and give yourself adequate time to work on this, you should be planning to request and collect energy expenditure data from your top vendors now. And so remember that OCS expects each state to collect data from the top 5 electric companies, and this includes cases with and without electric main heat, the top 5 natural gas companies, the top 10 propane vendors, and the top 10 fuel oil vendors. Now we have guides on how to identify the top vendors. We have guides on how to collect and request data. We have templates for you to even send to the utility to request this data. And so we recommend targeting those vendors with the most clients and getting it requested by December, your data requested, so you have time to get it back and review it and prepare the report. Apprise, once again, is here to help you with any piece of that if you need it, especially if you're new and you have no idea what I'm talking about. Don't hesitate to give us a call and we'll walk you through it. So let's take another poll. How helpful was this webinar in understanding what is needed to complete the FY 2023 household report long form? Was it not at all helpful, not too helpful, somewhat helpful, or very helpful?
And then we're going to turn to questions right after the poll.
Well, that's good to see. So this was somewhat helpful or very helpful. We would love your feedback either in terms of telling us what we could do better in this webinar. Remember, we are going to be doing it again, so if we can make any improvements between now and then, we'd welcome your suggestions. We also would welcome your suggestions in the form of questions. So if there are questions you did not get answered in this webinar, please put them forward now or even just after the webinar so that we can make sure those are addressed in future training. And so now you can see where the GoToWebinar question box is, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dan and Joseph to facilitate Q&A.
Yes, we have a few questions coming in, a lot about the new requirements, but before we get to that, just a question. Do we have an estimate for when the household report will be ready in OLDC?
I know they're working on it, and I think what Megan said was it should be available in the next month. So November, it should be ready to begin entering.
Okay, and then there are a couple similar questions noting that there were options for rent with utilities billed separately and rent with utilities included, but people are asking, what about times when, for example, gas is included in the rent, but electricity is not, and they're providing assistance for both?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're right that there's two categories. One is utilities included in rent, and the other is utilities not included in rent. I'm going to look at the instructions to see if they address that issue. My sense is that if their main heating fuel is included in rent or billed separately, you'd want to put billed separately, but I'm going to double check that. That's a great question. Melissa, do you know offhand? Do you recall from the instructions?
I don't recall.
But yeah, that's a really good question. So we're going to look at that.
Okay, and then another question about the new sections. Are those based on bill payment assistance or any type of assistance?
That's also a really good question. So the goal is to be able to report that for all households assisted, but it's certainly the case that you may be collecting it for everybody who's getting your main bill payment assistance, but you're not yet fully collecting it for people who get, weatherization or furnace repair and replacement. So you should, for 2023, you should report what you have available. And then the goal is in the future to be able to report that for all households that are receiving LIHEAP assistance.
Okay, and then one question, will we be able to access this PowerPoint after and recording after we're done, and where?
Yeah, so the PowerPoint is here now in the handouts. What we do is the recording gets posted on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel that ACF has with all of the training webinars. So it's going to get posted there. And then the slides, just the slide deck, gets posted on the performance management website. And I think also the training page on the LIHEAP ACF training page.
So Dan, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but those two questions, and I imagine they're more like that, as we either find the answers or develop answers because they're not already written down, how can we make sure all the grantees get them? Would we add a slide to this, training and send it out, or would we have an FAQ, or where are those answers going to be?
Yeah, I think what we would want to do is definitely have that in the next webinar. But also, yes, we would want to send out something to everyone who attended saying, here's what we found on that.
Okay.
Okay, and then also, I think, Dan, you mentioned the templates for reaching out to suppliers, and there's a question about how that can be accessed.
Those are on the performance management website, and I guess, Joseph, we know who asked that, so we can send them the link to all of that. But there's a section on the website for performance measures, data collection. and it has the templates to use and how, like Melissa said, how to identify your top vendors.
There's a whole data collection guide for those of you who haven't seen it. It kind of has an introduction that goes over each piece of data you need and where to collect it. And then it has all kinds of additions, like pieces to go along with it for more in-depth questions. So I'd encourage you, especially if you're new, to go out and take a look at that. And I know we're going to be doing a performance measures training in the spring for those of you who are really new. But until then, that's a really great resource to use.
Okay, another question here about supplemental funds. Is there no special reporting for supplemental or disaster funds issued in FY23?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So for FY23, there were multiple different funding releases, and funds came from different pots that had different names, like disaster funding. But the good news is that you are not asked in the household report, and in the household report or the performance measures, you don't have to report anything separately for those who just got like the disaster funds or a particular pool of the FY23 funds. So for the household report, let's take heating assistance. You're asked to report the number of households that got heating assistance. That's from any funding source. And then there are still 2 lines below the top line for heating assistance. One of them is heating assistance with the American Rescue Act Plan funds. And that is if you had any remaining ARP Act funds from the prior years that you had obligated, but you ended up not serving households until 2023, then you would want to report them on that ARP line as well. But I think for most of you that ARP line is not going to be applicable for most of the assistance types. And there's still on the report a line for the CARES Act, which was several years ago now that those funds were issued. But that the report can't be really modified. It has to be modified every few years with OMB approvals. So those lines are still there. They're not going to be really applicable for most of you, but if you did have an amount of RPAC funds left over, you do want to break out and report how many households got those on that subset line that's labeled American Rescue Plan Act funds. But otherwise, you do not have to report anything separately for the 2023, each of the different funding pools that were released in 2023. I think we have time maybe for one more, Joseph.
Okay, this question is about the new demographic section again. If our system isn't set up to track applicant demographics, how should we approach this section?
So it's really important that that the first step is that you understand what is being required for the report, and then you're going to need to start to work to figure out how you can begin to collect that information probably on your application. And I'm sure Melissa, myself, OCS, and others would be happy to assist you with that process of figuring out how that can start to be collected. But it's important to start that. We know that can be a lengthy process, so you want to start thinking about it and moving on it soon. All right, well, I think we've reached the end of the webinar today. So as we mentioned, we'll be repeating this in December. We're going to look into the one question about the own rent. And we're also going to be communicating about the other upcoming webinars for the grantee survey and performance measures. So with that, we thank you for your time today and look forward to hearing from you or seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.